So next we're going to talk about some club and after school activities and how we can manage those with our orchestra programs. So just some thoughts about, some tricks and some tips for working with our extracurriculars. Many of us are involved not only with our own orchestra programs, but different activities and clubs. Some of us coach sports or we're involved with different organizations on campus. So I would say number one, don't overcommit yourself. We all tend to be very committed to everything we do. Thus the reason we're musicians and artists. And so it's really important to get involved with what you're passionate about, whether you're the tennis coach, the cheer coach, the Triumph sponsor, but limit yourself to maybe one additional thing. Because obviously if you're coaching tennis and that season is in the middle of LGPE season, that might be a really stressful time. So also think carefully about the time of year, how much extra time it takes, but I think it's important that we still stay involved in our local school and our community. If you want to run a club for anime and that's something you really love, I think that's great. Just don't commit to 19 other clubs. And just like we tell the kids, get involved, but don't overdo it. I think if you can have a co-sponsor, that's awesome. And in fact, if you can have even more than one co-sponsor, that many hands make light work. Is really helpful to have somebody else to bounce ideas with. And also, like if you can't be there because it's LGPE season, well, then you've got somebody else that can be there. So, see if you can partner up with another teacher that you enjoy working with. If you're the Triumph sponsor and you're the orchestra teacher, maybe you and the band and chorus teacher can all co-sponsor Triumph. And then that also shows the kids that you work well with your peers, and then that helps them work well together. Know the rules at your school and your location. Every school has different rules for how you meet with clubs. Some want clubs meeting before school or after school based on school hours. You may have certain forms you need to fill out to reserve rooms, to have air conditioning, which is nice, to reserve courts or fields or any of these things. So really know who to go to at your school and make sure you know the rules so that you're not in a situation where you're unprepared and then the students are waiting around. Pick meeting dates and times that will work with the school schedule, but especially with your school schedule. So, for example, I'm the Triumph sponsor. Well, we know that Mondays at our school are kind of sacred school meeting days. So having Triumph on Mondays is probably not a great idea. So making sure that you're picking days that work, knowing that if you are the Triumph sponsor and most of the kids in Triumph are also in Beta Club, you don't want to meet the same date and week as Beta Club. So, working with your school schedule and making sure that it works, fitting in with the other clubs and activities. Determine a good space that will be available. So again, work with the people in your building. So many times these problems that crop up can be avoided if we're communicating with our administrators, school personnel that help control those things. Fees. So every school, again, has policies about fees you're allowed to charge for your club. It's very different between middle and high school. So know the rules and what you can include. And then the most important thing I think you can do is to develop student leaders. My Triumph organization, sometimes I feel like they run without me. And actually sometimes they're like, hey, did you guys tell me that you guys were having this extra meeting? And so making sure that the communication is really good between the student leaders and the sponsor. But, you can develop great student leaders who actually will run the club really well. And then it becomes more their organization. And you're just there to oversee things like the money, help give them direction. But really, it's their club and their organization. So program activities after school. So this is where you have orchestra activities after school. So before we were talking about some extracurricular things, but this is when you have your co-curricular events with your orchestra program. So I would say to be careful how much you program outside of school hours. Obviously, we have concerts and activities that we want to do with kids, but I would say that you limit the amount of time required after school for students. So for example, if you know that March is LGPE and you're already going to schedule one after school rehearsal and they have weekend LGPE, then maybe I wouldn't schedule 2 other after school fun activities that month. Maybe that's a lot in the month of March. So spread out your time, spread out your commitments, sort of think through what you're going to require, because so many of our students are involved in other activities, clubs, sports, and we don't want to have students think that if they're involved in athletics, or clubs or activities that they can't be in the arts. So I would plan very carefully what required events you have and plan it around times that you don't have other required events. Really important to be organized with where, when, all those things when students are to be there. So students should be very aware of call times, what they're to bring, what they're to wear, what the protocol is, if they're to check in, if they're to sign out. I think it's very important we communicate all this information. Even in high school, parents need this information. Sometimes I think in high school, we think the kids are bigger, they're supposed to be responsible for themselves. We all know they are not sometimes. So please be sure to communicate, whether you're a younger grade teacher or an upper grade teacher, that what the students are doing, where they're going, when they're supposed to be there, so that if a parent comes to pick up a child, you know where that child is. And if there's an emergency, you have an emergency contact. So that way you're avoiding putting yourself in a bad situation that may come back later on you. I find in general, if I'm asking students to do something after school, that food is always a great motivator. So for example, we have County Youth Orchestra, and I'm one of the conductors, and it meets at my school. So we have students come in from the youth orchestra to set up before the concert. Well, we order up some pizzas. Magically, we have plenty of student volunteers to set up the stage. So, sometimes just being kind, and, if I order a few pizzas, that really makes a huge difference. At your school, if you can put it in your budget to provide a little bit of snack, a little treat, some kind of reception after the concert. Sometimes just a little like, hey, this is fun and I appreciate you goes a long way. Sometimes we're on a really early schedule at my school, but we've made our top orchestra come in and do a 6 a.m. rehearsal because that's the only time they don't have something that they're busy on. So we'll provide donuts. So, finding ways to engage the kids and make it fun. And food is a great motivator of children. Communicate clearly the pickup plan and the pickup time. Often, even if parents are invited to a concert, many times they may not be able to come for whatever reason, but they need to know where to pick up their student and what time. So having start times and end times is really important. And again, even if you're teaching older kids, we want them to be responsible, but I just assume that they're not. And I make sure that all that information not only goes out to my student communication routes like Remind and email, but also to my parent communication, emails, newsletters, etc. If you have a large number of students involved and you're by yourself, ask for help. Ask for parent volunteers, ask for other teacher volunteers. I think if you're a middle school teacher, ask for student volunteers from the high school. If you know there's going to be a lot of kids involved, get extra help, because then that way you're not dividing your attention so many ways. If there's a gap between school getting out and your activities starting, like let's say school gets out at 3 and your concert doesn't start till 6, but there may be kids hanging out after, have a plan in place. So we all know that sometimes kids will hang out after school before a concert. Where are they supposed to be? Where are they allowed to be? Where are they allowed to go? So making sure that you have a clear plan for students. I think anytime you're going to have an after school activity for your program or a weekend activity, the key is communication. You should provide too much information and try to make it fun and exciting for the kids.